Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode of Macquarie University Sunday Sessions. I'm one of your hosts, Rory O'Connor, and I'm joined by my co-host, Andrew Kremen. How are you?
Rory, good to see you. I'm very good.
Good to see you too, legend. Hopefully you had a fantastic Christmas and a Happy New Year.
It was a very busy one, but no, a lot of good things have happened. Got a new job as well.
Fantastic stuff. We're joined by our special guest this evening, academic Anthony Dillon. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, guys.
Fantastic. So glad you can be here. I'll just bring in a quick intro. So Anthony is an academic and commentator on Indigenous affairs. He identifies as both Aboriginal and Australian. He believes that the current popular ideologies which portray Indigenous people merely as victims of history and white Australia should be challenged. So our first question to you, Anthony, is could you please give us a bit more information about your background and how you got involved as an academic and a commentator?
Yeah, look, just a snapshot. I think it was about 30 plus years ago. I was working as a public servant in Queensland, and Indigenous health was a big issue at the time. So I was kind of exposed to the data and that. And it was about the time when the internet had just started, believe it or not. So in addition to learning from my work about the plight of Aboriginal people, you started reading the internet and you started to be exposed to other opinions and that sort of thing. But I did notice what I felt was a bias when I was a public servant, and that was in the policies and documents within Queensland Health, which I was working for at the time. You know, there was this rhetoric of Indigenous people should be providing services for Indigenous people, and that kept coming through time and time again. And I just felt, well, why should it be? How about just anyone who's competent or cares provides services for Indigenous people, and vice versa. You know, you can have an Indigenous person providing services for a non-Indigenous person. I don't think anyone would be upset over that. So I guess it started from that, and then it just kind of snowballed, you know, as more and more ideas were presented because we had this platform called the internet. And, you know, I was hearing similar views to mine, a few, but mostly views that were not similar to mine. And it just got me thinking. So I just sort of gradually eased into it, you know, almost as a hobby kind of thing, even though I was working with Indigenous data and that sort of thing. And then I guess just, you know, identifying as part Aboriginal kind of lends yourself to particular jobs and tasks within the public service and within university. And so I kind of just eased into it that way.
Oh, fantastic. I also just want to mention to our audience, if you have any questions for Anthony, feel free to comment them on the Facebook video below, and hopefully we'll get around to all of them if we have time. So thank you for that background there.
If I can just add one thing, and I did notice over time that there was more and more opposition to my views out there.
Yeah, right. No worries. And we'll hopefully be able to address some of them tonight and some of the concerns that are coming up about some of the topics. So our first question is, you know, what is Australia Day about, and what do you think it means to most people?
Okay. First of all, for any event, you can give it its own meaning. So, you know, I've got an energy drink here. I could say it's a great vitalizing substance, and someone else could say, no, it's sugary rubbish, whatever. So whatever meaning you want to give to it, I personally, and I think many other Australians, just see Australia Day as a day to celebrate that Australia is a great country. And, you know, if part of that celebration includes reflecting on the past and looking at the origins, that's fine. But the origins shouldn't become the front stage, the centre stage. That's background, it's important background. But the here and now is that, you know, we celebrate that Australia, as imperfect as what it is pretty much a good country.
I definitely agree with that. How much support does Australia Day have amongst the Australian people?
Okay, you know, who knows for sure, but in one recent survey I saw put out by the Institute for Public Affairs, I think they said 65% supported it, had general support for it. Now, it's good to refer to those surveys, but at the end of the day, I don't think we should be making a decision either way based on a consensus, or, what a survey, even if it was a really accurate survey, just because the majority of people believe something doesn't necessarily mean we need to support it. There should be better reason than that. But yes, it is interesting to know that, on this survey, 1,000 people, about 65%. So it certainly shows that there's, a significant mass out there who are content with the way Australia Day is.
Absolutely. So then moving on to our next one then, why do you think changing the date is not a good idea?
Okay, well, first of all, let me state up front, if it did get changed, I'm not going to protest or oppose it, but I am happy to express my opinion in this forum and other forums that it's not going to do any good in any practical sense for Indigenous people. So changing the date doesn't suddenly make people have better living environments or help them in any practical way. It might provide activists with some short, warm, fuzzy feelings for a few moments or a few seconds. But there's a couple of other reasons. I guess the most important reason I feel is if you do, well, first of all, the people wanting it changed do it on the premise that it is somehow hurtful to Indigenous people. That spot on the calendar, 26th of January, where there happen to be celebrations of Australia, is hurtful to people. That's absolute nonsense. And if you then, legislate or whatever, get the date changed, that would just reinforce people's beliefs that, oh, the day really must have been hurting me, otherwise government wouldn't have gone to those lengths to change it. So that's the main reason. I just want to really emphasize, no, the day and the celebrations do not hurt anyone. It's just simply opportunistic offence. People just use it as an excuse to take offence, and offence is always taken, never given. So the people aren't hurting in any way. And I mean, there's many Aboriginal people who celebrate that day. So, why not?
If I can just expand upon that, I've got a sort of a bit of a history in theatre, and that's a very progressive sphere. There are all, I can already see posts from my friends who are very much against Australia Day, and they feel very strongly about something like this. So, are you saying that from that they've been essentially they're being told to be offended, but they're not really offended?
Yes, like I said, any of us can make ourselves offended about anything. For example, and there's countless examples. We've seen the cancel culture with coon cheese and Chico lollies and Redskins and all that sort of thing, apparently offending people. In my family, and indeed many other families, we love those little gollywog dolls. Right? They're just beautiful. We just love them. Yet some people say, oh, that's offensive. Well, how is it offensive? Oh, well, it just is. Absolute nonsense. I can remember, well, I was taught at school, the term Aborigine is a noun used to describe Aboriginal people. So you can have Aboriginal, adjective, people, or just an Aborigine noun. And then overnight, it become offensive. And I've asked people, why is it offensive? And they just say, well, it just is. So, it's just absolute nonsense to something is offensive because, well, it just is. And other people are saying it, and I can even show you a government policy where they've changed the terminology, so it must be offensive. Just nonsense.
I distinctly remember a cousin of mine. She married a Sri Lankan man, and she had gollywog dolls because she said, it's the skin color of my kids, and she had no problems with it.
Yeah, and some people will point out a particular history with those dolls, and I've seen conflicting reports about those histories. So I can never know for certain exactly what the correct history is. But some have said it was used to degrade black people, whatever. Well, let's suppose that was true. It's not what it's being used for today. It's a bit like when I read a quote that I like, and I believe it to be from a prominent person in history, and then I find out that it's questionable whether it was that person. Well, I judge the quote on its content, and I'll say, look, this was believed to have been spoken by such and such. Don't know for sure, but I really don't care. The quote has value today. Those dolls serve a purpose today. So regardless of the history, let's judge things in the here and now.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's something I find too. A lot of some of these activists that we come across, I find that they're not really looking at people's intentions. And like what you were saying, they're having their own kind of offendedness pushed on it. So our next question is: I found that a lot of left-wing activists often make.
Can I just add one other point?
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, I think the other reason too is most of us know that there, within the group of people who identify as Aboriginal, there are some who are doing it really tough. Okay, and I call them the genuine victims, and then there's the counterfeit victims.
Right.
And so we know about the genuine victims, living in poverty and facing violence and all that sort of thing. And for many Australians with a generally a good heart, they kind of feel helpless, a little bit guilty. They want to do something. They want to be seen to be doing the right thing. So along comes an easy solution: be offended about Australia Day, cry racism, or whatever, and you'll get these virtue signalers saying I oppose Australia Day. I think this action is racist. I feel good now. And then they can just go back to living, thinking that they've made some sort of contribution, when in fact they haven't.
Yeah. Well, that kind of ties into my next question. I find that a lot of left-wing activists often make, to be honest, ludicrous and false accusations, I find, against the majority of people who celebrate Australia Day. Because quite often the accusations are that anyone celebrating Australia Day must be celebrating genocide. They must love white supremacy. Now, I've never celebrated anything of the sort, anything related to that. I've never heard of anyone celebrating such a thing. Is there any actual evidence that people are using Australia Day to celebrate genocide and white supremacy?
No, I agree with you that it is the most ridiculous argument. I don't know of anyone, and I don't think any of the people watching this, listening to this, would know of anyone. And let's suppose there was someone who on that day was celebrating genocide. What a clown that person must be, Could you imagine telecasting that person to the rest of Australia and say, hey, this moron is celebrating genocide? What a jerk. But realistically, I don't think anyone is doing it. So again, we celebrate that Australia is a pretty good country.
You've given lots of reference to some popular narratives that don't seem to have the strongest foundation in our history, in our reality. We've got an audience question here. How do you feel about university Marxists interfering with Aboriginal activism? And do you think they do more harm to Aboriginal activism reputation?
Yeah, short answer, yes. Now I steer away from anything that's evaluating anything with Marxism because it's such a broad, ambiguous category sometimes. But yes, they've just sort of added a bit of fuel to the fire, which isn't achieving any good whatsoever, and we see lots more of it. So I don't like it.
Well, for our next question, who do you think are the kinds of people who really dislike Australia Day and they want to see it removed, or what are their potential motivations?
Yeah.
It just doesn't seem like your some spur of the moment sort of thing to push for it so strongly. Yeah.
Well, I guess amongst those who identify as Aboriginal, and I'm going to be speared in the leg for this. It's ones who are probably the most important thing for them is letting the world know that they are Aboriginal. Okay. For a few of them, a handful of people, and by a handful of, can be thousands, out of the, 700,000 or so people who identify as Aboriginal. For that minority, the most important thing for them is they want everyone to know that they are Aboriginal. Now, look, when I introduce myself, I'm just Anthony. I'm not Anthony the proud Kumba Merry Man or whatever. And there's nothing wrong with if you want to say who your Aboriginal group are, that's fine. But when there's this insistence that other people acknowledge or recognise that you're Aboriginal, and we know it's often a bit of a joke. Sometimes you get people looking like you two, identifying as a proud, whatever the clan name is. But they just want to broadcast to the rest of Australia this us-them mentality. There's you white fellas, and then there's me, black fella. So you got those ones, caught up in the identity politics, where the whole world revolves around their Aboriginality. Me, I have Aboriginal ancestry. I have English ancestry. I'm Queenslander. I'm heterosexual. I'm male. I'm in my mid-50s. I live in the suburbs. I have all these things that make up who I am, but my life doesn't revolve around any one of those, and I don't insist that you recognise any of those things. They're just a part of who I am. That's for me. But for others, they just want you to know, they need you to know that they're Aboriginal, and jumping onto a cause where Aboriginal people are painted as the oppressed and the white man as the oppressor just gives them an opportunity to shout, look, I'm Aboriginal.
Do you think it's a method for bypassing debate?
What sort of debate? On more important issues?
So, for example, if there are discrepancies regarding so with Indigenous statistics, like I remember doing in PE in school, like the health statistics are rather harrowing for Aboriginal people. But instead of being able to deal with the specific problems that would actually raise things like age expectancy,
for sure,
you just put forward, you're Aboriginal, someone's Aboriginal, someone's white. One's the solution, one's the problem.
Yeah, it does. People look for blame, and as that great American economist Thomas Sowell said, basically people are looking for heroes and villains. They love a narrative where there's a hero and a villain, and it's a very convenient one to talk about the oppressed Aborigine and the oppressive or the oppressor white person, and it gets reduced. The inequalities, the problems which we all know about facing Indigenous people. Yes, there is a gap in terms of life expectancy, employment, health, and all those sorts of things. It just gets reduced very simply and neatly to a racial problem. It is far more complex than that. Racism is not driving or broadening, the gap. There's, more important issues that are contributing to that. And yes, it does become a distraction and a smokescreen to finding solutions and dealing with the tough problems. And interestingly, or somewhat paradoxically, you'll find that those Indigenous folk who most loudly oppose and protest against Australia Day are probably doing okay and aren't suffering from the problems which affect too many Indigenous people, often in remote communities and elsewhere. Those protesters seem to be doing well, and we know why they're doing well. They've got an education, they've got a job, they live in an environment where they've got fresh water and access to computers and can go to the gym, go to the library, go to the doctor, and all those sorts of things. They have all that, yet they're using their opportunity to talk about, us, them, I'm Aborigine, you're not, you're oppressing me, etc., etc. When they should be using their platform to say, hey, look, I'm doing quite well, and I want my brothers and sisters who are not doing quite well to have what I've got, and this is how I got it.
Absolutely. So then for those of us who kind of don't want to get involved in that kind of, who do love Australia, who do love celebrating Australia Day and the fantastic country we live in, it leads on to a post you made. You said, change the hate, not the date, recently on Twitter. What do you think people such as ourselves can do about that to kind of keep the tradition of Australia Day going and stop the division that some people are trying to make it about?
Okay, I guess first, as strange as what it might say, at least respect the right of those other people to hold their opinions and their fake offence. Okay, allow them to do that. Have forums like this, where people like me get on and talk, and also allow opposing voices. I mean, they've already got their platform already, but they should be welcome into a platform like this. They probably wouldn't want to, but at least give them that opportunity. Don't suppress their voices. Allow them to say what they want to say, but also if you think the opportunity is there, say, look, I disagree for these reasons. And, people can be quite assertive, particularly non-Indigenous people can be quite assertive and friendly at the same time and say, look, I understand what's happened in this country's history, or, although people's versions of history may vary a little bit, we cannot deny that, some bad things happen. And I'm not responsible, that non-Indigenous person can say, I'm not responsible for that. And yes, I may be benefiting from that, what happened, but so are many of the Indigenous people today who have those platforms. They're also benefiting from, the arrival or invasion, if you like, of the white men. So respect others, have open forums like this, just present your argument in a calm manner. And most importantly, I think there's still plenty of places where you can celebrate Australia Day. Just do that, and do it in a sensible way. Putting the identity politics aside, I'm not much of a fan of Australia Day celebrations where you've got the drunks and all that sort of thing. So if you're going to celebrate Australia Day, do it like the majority, where it's a fun, happy day. You might have a few beers, that's fine. Throw the frisbee and have a barbie. That's great.
I completely agree with you there. We do have a question here. I was talking to a friend who's in the US right now. He's reluctant to celebrate a country he used to immigrate to, as he witnessed the national public being too self-satisfied whenever they request governments to implement mandates and lockdowns to protect them from an illness. How do you feel about the current reluctance in regards to celebrating Australian Day because of their dissatisfaction with the country's COVID response?
Oh, I really don't want to be talking about COVID.
Well then, all right. Yeah. I'm happy to move on from it.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a big animal.
I think it's more. I think there's just a lot of despondency across the West in general, and it's over a number of things, and there's just pressures from all.
What I can say, it was interesting last year. I felt that the activism didn't have as much presence, and that could have been because COVID took centre stage, and that might happen again this year. But even if there isn't as much presence, we know that there's still going to be activists in the social media.
I have a good question that kind of possibly summarizes that question a bit better. I think what the gist of the question is, should people still be celebrating Australia Day even when they feel perhaps Australia, whether in its past or its current government, have done the wrong thing?
Yeah. Well, regardless of whether you think it's the wrong or right thing, I went out last night into a public venue, and yes, there were restrictions. You couldn't dance, you couldn't even sing in your seat, but we had a good time anyway. And so long as I think come Australia Day, we will still be able to go outside and throw the frisbee and light the barbecue up, and keep distance, wear mask, whatever it is you have to do, and celebrate Australia Day that way.
We've got another question that we wanted to ask. Is some people have claimed, would changing the date of Australia Day help Indigenous people?
I think we've already answered that. In just summarising, I don't think it will. First of all, let me say, if we did change it and we saw some benefits for Indigenous people, I'll be the first to say I was wrong. Okay? But if we change it, and a few years afterwards we've still got the same problems, I will then be saying, okay, look, we've changed it. Can we get on with doing what we know works? So to summarise the answers, no, it doesn't help in any practical way. And in fact, I think it even has a negative effect where it reinforces people's belief that a day does magically upset them. I believe that it has the power to upset them is a bit like voodoo,
If I can ask, if I can reference the old Big Point ad, what does January 26th mean to Australians? And the kid responds, everyone gets a day off to watch cricket. The day itself, it's like it was picked because of Captain Arthur Phillip's landing on Sydney Cove and raising the Union flag on January 26th. Do you feel that we actually often miss that significant, sort of milestone in our history, going out just to have the day off?
Yeah, that information there is available for anyone who certainly it's not it doesn't seem like we make a big deal of it. It is mentioned in passing and people can refer to it as much as they want. But I'm not particularly attached to the day, that date. But like I said, there's potential for harm if we do change it. But again, for me, it's more about we are celebrating what a great country Australia is today.
I have a comment here that's been mentioned. It says there, our change of the anthem's lyrics of our anthem to "We are one and free" is ironic, since the change only served to highlight and occurred because we are most definitely not one right now. I expect any changes in the date of our national holiday to function in the same way. Would you agree or disagree with that comment?
That changing the date will make us function more as one?
So it says here that the comment, I believe, is saying that it's ironic that the national anthem was changed to "We are one and free," because the person feels that, well, it actually highlighted that we're not, because it was kind of, you had two opposing sides agreeing with the change, not agreeing with the change. So the person says, I expect any change to the actual date of Australia Day would have a similar result, not really do much in particular.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it just, again, it gives you that short-term feel-good emotions. And then it probably, it could set a precedent, although I think a precedent has been set already with other things in cancel culture, where what will be the next thing changed? Do we, will it be, we need to get rid of all the coins that have got the Queen's head on it because some people find that offensive? I have the coin, I don't care whose image is on it, what I can get, so long as I can still buy this kind of with it.
Anthony, stop ideas.
Yeah, okay, well.
Well, one of the things I wanted to touch on then, continuing on from that, was going to the national anthem, the change from "We are young and free" to "one and free." Do you think that had any impact? Do you think it was positive, negative, or nothing really?
Well, I haven't felt it. I think the majority, that's not to say it wasn't wrong, all right, but I haven't noticed any difference. I don't rule out the idea of making changes to these things if there's an obvious problem, but I question if this one was one where it's potentially results in a significant change in anything. I mean, most people only know a few lines in the anthem anyway, and it's just a bit of a ritual where people will just sit through it, a bit like a welcome to country, wait for it to be over, and then move on to the festivities or whatever.
Just continuing on, one of the things I found was, as soon as that change had been made, the very next day there were calls saying it wasn't enough, we should scrap the whole anthem. So I think, similar to what you were saying, I think if some of these changes are made, I think it does set a precedent that, if we kick up about anything can be moved and changed, whether it's actually having a result or not. So I don't know where some of these changes will end, whether it'll ever be enough for certain people.
Yeah, oh, exactly. And I think you just touched on too. Sometimes we can make a change and they will focus on that and say, well, we still find that offensive now for another reason or whatever. So, damned if we do, damned if we don't.
We do have another audience question here. Have you had critics dismiss your perspective in regards to Australia Day?
Yes, many. Every year I get asked for comment, or sometimes I write an article for a media outlet. And there's lots of support, but there's also lots of critics as well. And some of the Indigenous opponents make their criticisms much more personal. That they are often personal attacks. But yeah, it's only ever been verbal. I've never been confronted by anyone or anything like that. That's unlikely to happen.
You mentioned several times about closing the gap. Can you give us some ways in which the average person might be able to help in regard to closing the gap, particularly say in regional communities?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so for the average person, they are a bit distant, and I guess one way is they can engage in the conversation, the debate, and just offer their opinion on what they believe are the ways for closing the gap, which, in my opinion, are seeing if a community is economically viable, investing in jobs, infrastructure, education, that sort of thing there. If that's not possible, then you need a sensible, sensitive exit strategy. Apart from that, there's organisations. There's one that I volunteer money to regularly, and it changed its name recently, but it was just called Indigenous Communities Volunteer, something like that. So, if you feel moved to make a financial contribution, you can do things like that. Be aware of, the true state of affairs, so that you can offer a counter argument. If you're sitting in a party, and my screen just went blank then. Are we still there?
No, we can see you just fine.
Yeah. So, I think it's good to be informed so that you can offer an opinion at the right time, because you never know who you're offering that opinion to. It could be someone who's quite influential or someone who knows someone who's influential. But I think the important thing is the average Aussie, if the opportunity does present itself, well, then help in any way you can. But if you can't, that's fine. You don't have to be all things to all people. You don't have to, focus on every charity or every cause. You just do so for the ones that you have, that fall within your circle of influence, I guess. Does that answer the question?
It does. It does. We also have another audience question here. It might not be to the tone that you like, but it's asking if you think Australia is a racist country.
No, it's not. And can I have a minute to talk about that one?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure. Very often when I say Australia's not a racist country, my critics, particularly those ones with an IQ of, say, less than 70, will say something like, Anthony said there's no such thing as racism in Australia. No, I've never said that at all. I'm just saying Australia is not a racist country because of the presence of some racist elements. And I would just add to that too, the prevalence is, I don't believe, is anywhere near as high as what the social justice warriors and race hounds would want you to believe. So is there racism in Australia? Yes. I don't think it's very much, and certainly not enough to say Australia is a racist country. Now, as an analogy, I know many Indigenous people who live comfortably and they've got a good income. I've got a good income, and I know many more who have a much higher income than me. And even though a few of those people are my opponents, I still say good on them for getting to where you've got, and having that job, that prestige, that power. And so those Indigenous people who are living well off, got a good amount of money, are not few in number. There's many of them. However, based on that, it would be silly to say Indigenous people are a rich, wealthy people, because there's the presence of those who do have a good sum of money. Just like it would be silly to say Australia is a racist country because of the presence of some racist idiots. Just like it'd be silly to say Australian beaches are shark infested because we have some shark attacks each year. Yes, there are the presence of these elements, but not enough to warrant a conclusion of, we're a racist country.
Another question that's come in here says, Since you've had so much criticism, Anthony, for sharing your point of view, how do you cope with that, and how do you continue to express your opinion? Because particularly a lot of students that are involved in the Macquarie University Liberal Club, particularly on campus, they feel that they're a minority view. They feel that they can't express their opinion without some sort of severe backlash. So how do you cope with it and move forward?
Yeah. Okay. Look, depending on which environment I'm in, but in the public space, this is Australia. You're allowed to express your opinion. If you belong to a certain club, workplace, or whatever, you may have to use discretion, but focus on the quality, not the quantity of what you say. You might have some really good, valuable things to say, like if someone says Australia Day it's hurting Indigenous people, something simple like, well, there seem to be a lot of Indigenous people who enjoy Australia Day, so I'm just curious as to how you can draw that conclusion. Another very important, powerful thing to say is, when people talk about, the terrible deaths in custody, well, just letting them know the truth. Hey, well, actually, Aboriginal people in custody are not more likely to die than non-Aboriginal people in custody. And that's a truth which a lot of people don't know, although it's always been out there in the public domain since the early days of the Royal Commission. And to answer the other question, how do I keep going? Oh, that's very easy, because I have support by people like you, and so I have many supporters, not just personal supporters, but just people who just support the cause which I stand for, and just knowing that they're out there. And sometimes I hear from them personally, sometimes I don't, but knowing that there are plenty of supporters out there is enough to keep you going. And like I said, I'm not in any danger of being mugged or anything. I might be slandered in the social media, but those slanders are a greater reflection of the person making the dumb comments. But yeah, I do empathise with those people who are in an environment, whether it be at uni or their workplace, where they, feel that they have to be quiet. Sometimes it's good to draw a line in the sand and say, okay, yeah, look, I'll be quiet on such and such issue, but there are some things that I will not be quiet on. So you do have to choose your battles, and of course, do it respectfully. Allow other people, their right, and that's what I was saying before. The others, those who hate Australia Day, should at least have the right to say that they hate it, but we can also have the right to challenge that opinion.
Absolutely. And I do thank you for coming on the show again this evening. We are getting close to time. So one of our last questions, and then I'll leave it to you if you wanted to make any final comments, was what do you think the danger of not sharing your views are, of not standing up for something you believe in, if you think it's important?
Yeah, well, it does nothing for your own self-worth, I think. Each of us have a voice, and to the degree to which that voice is suppressed either externally or internally, where we're suppressing it, is the degree to which it undermines our own sense of self-worth. So yes, coming back to what I was saying a minute ago, you've got to use discretion, tact and timing and all that sort of thing. But we do need to express ourselves. And by expressing ourselves also, you get to let other people get to know about you as well, people who may have been feeling the same. I'm sure we've all been in that situation where we're in a lecture, we're afraid to ask a question, and someone else asks that same question. You think, oh gosh, I thought I was the only dummy here, sort of thing. So it's good to let other people know, just in a nice, reflective, respectful way. And if we don't have that voice, and I think that it'd be interesting to look at a parallel universe, but I think if our voices weren't there, I think things would be a lot more dire, a lot more tragic. So to a degree, we are holding back the avalanche sometimes, even though there's a bit of chaos. And I just think in some environments I've moved in, the best I've done is I've prevented it from being worse. So it is good to speak up. And who knows, I can say, although they've been few in number over the years, I have managed to win over a few people, particularly those people who might be sitting on the fence, okay? And they've only heard one side of the argument, and then they hear, the side of the argument from people like us. That can be enough to put something in to motivate them to want to join your side. So, never underestimate the power of one. Never underestimate the influence or the ripple effect you might have. But I guess the most important thing is just knowing that there's other people out there, some of whom you'll meet, some of them you won't meet, but knowing that they are supportive of you is a good motivator.
100%. And I think sometimes too, when you do make these comments, it's kind of a thankless job, because quite often when you make comments, you don't get the positive reviews. People don't often go to a website to leave a 5 stars. It's usually only the negative or the noisy minority that hate you that you'll hear. So you've got no idea really who you've influenced, who you've inspired, or who you've touched. Did you have any follow-ups, Andrew?
Oh, we do have one more question. I believe you wrote an essay in Kevin Donnelly's book, Cancel Culture and the Left's Long March.
Yeah.
Yeah, could you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah. That was one of the questions raised by the viewers or listeners, was it?
Yeah, we've got one from Dan.
Yeah. I was asked to write a chapter on that, giving the Indigenous input perspective on that, on cancel culture. And I did write about that, how that, and this was touched on already, that some people are silenced, whether they're Indigenous or not Indigenous, they are silenced from expressing their views on important matters, whether it be child protection, for example. Is Australia Day evil or good? And what's the best way to allocate money? That sort of thing. And too many people are silent. So I was just, as we were just saying, I'm just hopefully giving a bit of hope to others, because I do say, you do have a right to voice your opinion. And as I always say, Aboriginal affairs is everyone's business. In Australia, at least anyway, it's everyone's business if you want it to be your business. It's not just owned by Indigenous people, because Indigenous people are people first, Indigenous second, or, Indigenous Australians are Australian first, Indigenous second. So we're all in it together. That's all I can say about the book. There were many other good chapters in it. And I much of what I've said in this session, I've said in the book or variations of it.
So if people want to find out more information about some of the writing you do, Anthony, where could they find you?
My website, if you're able to make that available, www.anthonydillon, ANTHONYDILLON.com.au. There's a Facebook page I started up a while ago. I let others run it, but it's called Australians All at the Crossroads, where it's a Facebook page on Aboriginal issues, very different to the other pages like NITV, where they're just preaching victimhood and that sort of thing. We have more discussions like what we've had here.
Absolutely. So we'll drop those in the comments below. We've just started to run out of time now. Were there any other questions that came through, Andrew, or any final comments?
No, I believe that's it. It's now posted in the comment section, your website, Anthony.
Thank you.
Yep.
Oh, good.
All right. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Anthony Dillon. Much appreciated. You're always welcome back on the show whenever you'd like. I've been your host, Rory O'Connor, my co-host, Andrew Preman. This has been another episode of the Macquarie University Liberal Club Sunday Sessions. Thank you so much and have a good evening.